Something unusual is happening inside Gaza. Palestinian militias are declaring open opposition to Hamas in areas where the group is banned from operating. Today, we'll look at the leaders behind this movement, why they're gaining ground now, and whether this signals the beginnings of an actual alternative to Hamas. A new development is unfolding inside Gaza, one that hasn't gotten much attention, but may represent the first credible attempt to build an alternative to Hamas from within the Gaza Strip itself. Now, as you know, I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to the grand plans for the day after in Gaza. We've heard a lot of theories, a lot of diplomatic wish-casting, and a lot of arm-twisting about who should run Gaza once Hamas is gone, if they leave. Now, most of that optimistic planning falls apart once it comes into contact with reality. But what's happening now is different because it isn't coming from a policy paper or a Western capital. It's emerging from the ground, inside Gaza, from Palestinians who have decided that they're done being ruled and abused by Hamas. A number of reports are shedding light on a network of armed militias forming across the Strip. These aren't large armies or political parties. They're smaller, localized groups, often clan-based, sometimes tied to former Palestinian Authority security officers who are openly hostile to Hamas and operating in areas where Hamas technically isn't allowed to function. And that's the key. These groups are working inside what's known as the Yellow Zone. That's territory under Israeli military control where Hamas is banned from carrying weapons or running its shadow government. In theory, this zone was supposed to keep Hamas out. In practice, Hamas still tries to use the area for extortion, checkpoints, and intimidation. But now, these new militias are stepping into that space. One of the most outspoken leaders is a man named Shoki Abu Nusayra, based in eastern Khan Yunis. He's a former Palestinian Authority, or PA, security officer with decades of military experience, and he's not shy about his views. He told reporters the ceasefire has been a, quote, kiss of life for Hamas, because while the world focuses on aid trucks, Hamas is busy regrouping, reorganizing, rearming, and reasserting control. Then there's Ashraf al-Mansi, now operating a militia in northern Gaza. He's tied to former PA security personnel, people who remember a time before Hamas seized power in 2007 from the Palestinian Authority. They've seen what Hamas rule has done to Gaza's economy and civil society, and they're trying to provide basic security in areas where Hamas has either withdrawn or been pushed out. Further south, you have a figure named Yasser Abu Shabab near Rafah with deep tribal and Bedouin roots. We actually talked about him here on the PDB before. He and his group initially emerged while the war between Hamas and Israel was still raging. These various clans have long histories of resisting Hamas's attempts to control their territory and impose their ideology on the communities. They're now organizing more formally, acting as a kind of neighborhood security force with weapons, patrols, and a public stance against Hamas. Now, taken together, these groups and a few others form a loose chain along the length of Gaza, from the north near Beit Lahia down through Gaza City and Khan Yunis, all the way to Rafah. They're separated by clan structures and geography, but united by one thing, a rejection of Hamas. It isn't a controlled uprising, by any means. It's not an army, and it's definitely not a guaranteed solution to Gaza's long-term governance crisis. But for the first time since the 7th of October attacks on Israel, we're seeing something that looks like an organic alternative to Hamas, one with weapons and local legitimacy, and the ability to operate where Hamas is supposed to be absent. And Israel appears, at least for the time being, willing to tolerate, or at least not interfere with, these groups. That alone makes this worth watching, because if these militias succeed in holding territory, even small pockets of it, they begin to form what Hamas fears most, a rival power center inside Gaza made up of Palestinians who don't see Hamas as liberators, but as oppressors. Think of early-stage awakening councils, like what we saw in Iraq when Sunni tribes turned against al-Qaeda. I'm not saying this is the same thing, or that it will follow the same trajectory. As I said earlier, I am a cynic, and there are plenty of ways this can go sideways. Militias can fight each other, they can be corrupt, Hamas could assassinate their leaders, Israel could change strategy, or these groups could simply lack the cohesion needed to govern anything larger than a neighborhood. But as a strategy, as a way to slowly squeeze Hamas out of territory and create the beginnings of a non-Hamas governing class inside Gaza, well, it's a potentially viable scenario, and that makes it worth monitoring. So as the ceasefire continues and Hamas tries to rebuild, keep an eye on the people who operate in Gaza's yellow zone. They're signaling to Hamas and the world that they're tired of being ruled by a terror group. And if their movement grows, Hamas's biggest threat may not come from airstrikes or IDF ground operations, but from Palestinians who have simply had enough. All right, coming up next, a friend of the drug cartels is officially pardoned by President Trump. And a new report from the New York Times sheds more light on that controversial double strike against a narco-trafficking boat in the Caribbean back in early September. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here, PDB host and, of course, fashion icon. Now, I want to tell you about a great clothing company, and that would be True Classic. Look, the guys at True Classic started with a simple mission: to bring premium, comfortable clothing to the masses. Because looking and feeling great shouldn't come with a designer price tag. And clearly, the people agree. True Classic has sold over 25 million shirts to more than, get this, 5 million customers, and in the process have racked up over 200,000 five-star reviews. This brand is all about helping guys show up every day with confidence and purpose. Their shirts fit where they should, they feel incredible, I can guarantee that, and they don't break the bank. You get that tailored look without sacrificing comfort or blowing the budget. I've been wearing True Classic shirts for a while now, and you can feel the difference the moment you throw one on. Forget overpriced designer brands. Skip the cheap throwaway stuff. True Classic is built for comfort, built to last, and built to give back. You can find them on Amazon and at Target and Costco, Sam's Club, or just head on over to trueclassic.com/PDB to try them out for yourself. Welcome back to the PDB. Juan Orlando Hernández, or known as JOH, the former president of Honduras, convicted of working hand in glove with drug traffickers, is now a free man. After nearly 2 years in federal prison, serving a 45-year sentence, President Trump's pardon is official, wiping away a conviction that prosecutors said covered years of corruption, aiding and abetting cartels, bribes, and tons of cocaine trafficked into the U.S. But free is a relative term here. Hernandez doesn't have his passport, and he doesn't have legal status in the U.S., and according to his attorney, he couldn't leave the country even if he wanted to. There's no indication the government plans to deport him, but there's also no clarity on where he'll go or what his next steps will be. His future is, for now, very much in limbo. Now, this is all a follow-up to what we covered last week, when President Trump first announced his intention to grant a full and complete pardon to Hernandez. Now that it's official, well, we're getting a clearer picture of how this happened. According to new reporting from Axios, this wasn't some spontaneous act of mercy. Behind the scenes, there was a sustained lobbying campaign carried out by Hernandez's family, by his allies, and most notably, by longtime Trump confidant Roger Stone. And one element of that campaign was, reportedly, a letter that Hernandez wrote from federal prison. In that letter, he addressed the president as Your Excellency, praised Trump's leadership, and portrayed himself as the victim of a politically motivated prosecution. Stone reportedly took up the cause, undoubtedly for a handsome fee, pushing the message inside Trump's orbit and lobbying the president to view Hernandez as a wronged ally rather than a corrupt politician who spent years enabling cartel shipments into the U.S. From the outside, the whole thing looks less like a reconsideration of evidence, which, by the way, was solid, and more like an influence operation, one that, of course, ultimately now has paid off. And I'll be straightforward here. This pardon makes a mockery of the administration's claims to be conducting a war on drugs and defending America against cartels. You can't credibly warn the Sinaloa cartel or any other cartel, or announce new drone strike authorities, or talk about hard power along the southern border, and then turn around and pardon a foreign leader convicted in a U.S. court of helping traffickers move cocaine north by the tons. Those two actions can't be squared. The conflict is, let's call it glaring. And that's a statement of fact. It's not partisan politics. These cases matter. These messages that they send matter. And whether it's foreign partners, DEA teams on the ground, or families who've watched illicit drugs tear through their communities, pardoning someone like Hernandez raises real questions about consistency and priorities. Now, could Hernandez still face consequences back home in Honduras? Well, absolutely. Honduran politics are incredibly volatile, and his return, if it happens, could cause a political earthquake. But for now, he remains inside the U.S., technically free, yet with nowhere to go and no clear path forward. We'll keep following this because the implications stretch far beyond this individual pardon. They touch on credibility and deterrence and how the U.S. signals its commitment to taking on transnational crime. Now, one question we'll be looking to answer here is what entities or who paid for Roger Stone's lobbying effort and who else was involved. The good news here is that lobbying records, who paid what to which lobbying firm, well, those are publicly available. If someone, in this case Stone, was indeed lobbying the president on behalf of a foreign entity or foreigners, he'll need to have been properly registered as a lobbyist, and those financial transactions are required to be public records. We'll let you know what we find. Speaking of the war on drugs, I wanted to return to that September 2nd double strike on a narco boat. Initial reporting from the Washington Post claimed Secretary of War Pete Hegseth ordered the follow-up strike that killed survivors. But New York Times reporting, citing multiple officials, now says there's no firm evidence that he gave that order. It appears the reality is not what the Post first reported. When we first covered the Washington Post account here on the PDB, we walked through the basic timeline. On the 2nd of September, U.S. forces hit a suspected drug smuggling boat in the Caribbean, disabling the vessel, but leaving 2 drug runners alive in the water. American forces circled back and fired again, killing the survivors and sinking the boat. What the administration did not spell out at the time of the initial strike was the second blast and the fact that survivors were in the water. That silence gave the report from the Washington Post room to frame the follow-up strike as something darker. According to its reporting, Hegseth allegedly told commanders to make sure no one survived, and Special Operations Command Admiral Frank Bradley ordered the second strike to fulfill that verbal directive. The political storm built quickly, of course. Republicans and Democrats alike demanded answers, with armed services committees launching an investigation, promising, quote, vigorous oversight. That's the buzzword in Washington, D.C., vigorous oversight. The question was, did this mission amount to a war crime by executing shipwrecked drug runners that no longer posed a threat, on explicit orders from Washington? That's where the latest reporting matters. According to the New York Times, 5 U.S. officials who spoke separately and on the condition of anonymity said Hegseth did issue an execute order ahead of the 2nd September attack to engage the boat with lethal force, kill the people on board, and destroy the vessel and its cargo of drugs. But those same officials draw a crucial distinction that contradicts the Washington Post's claim. They say Hegseth's directive did not specifically address what should happen if a first missile failed to accomplish every objective. The officials also say the Secretary of War's order was not a response to surveillance footage showing survivors in the water, and that he issued no further instructions to Admiral Bradley as the mission played out. In other words, yes, this was a lethal strike, and yes, the written order called for killing the traffickers and destroying their cargo. But the idea that Hegseth saw survivors and told commanders to return and execute 2 men is exactly what these officials say did not happen. Instead, Admiral Bradley ordered the initial missile strike and then follow-up strikes that killed the survivors and sank the disabled boat. 2 officials told the New York Times that Hegseth gave no oral directive at the pre-mission meeting that went beyond the written execute order. Those officials questioned whether the surviving individuals were even Bradley's intended target in the follow-up strikes, arguing the damaged vessel and its cargo remained a threat and a lawful military objective, especially if another cartel boat might have come to retrieve it. At the White House, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley, quote, to conduct these kinetic strikes and insisted that Bradley, quote, worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the U.S. was eliminated. Hegseth echoed that stance on social media, saying he stands by Admiral Bradley's, quote, combat decisions on the 2nd of September mission and every strike since. Congress, meanwhile, is proceeding with its reviews. Senator Roger Wicker, the Republican chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, will lead a full investigation. On the House side, the Armed Services Committee, under Representative Mike Rogers, is preparing oversight, and Admiral Bradley is set to deliver a classified briefing later this week. All right, coming up in the back of the brief, President Trump delivers a rare public warning to Prime Minister Netanyahu over Israel's actions in Syria. I'll have those details when we come back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Let me take just a moment of time to talk about your security, specifically your online security, right? And I want to tell you about a great company called Delete Me that's all about keeping you safe online. Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. Look, Delete Me sends you regular, personalized privacy reports showing what information they found, where they found it, and what they've removed. If you're like me, you care about protecting your personal data. I know that Delete Me helps us stay ahead of threats like identity theft and doxing by removing information from data broker sites. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now you can get a special discount for our PDB listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/brief and use the promo code BRIEF at checkout. Again, the only way to get that 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/brief and enter code BRIEF at checkout. Once again, that's joindeleteme.com/brief, code BRIEF. In today's Back of the Brief, in President Trump's latest message for Israel, well, it turned some heads. After a deadly Israeli operation inside Syria, Trump issued an unusually sharp warning to Prime Minister Netanyahu, urging him not to derail Damascus's fragile political transition. In posts on Truth Social, Trump praised Syrian President Ahmed al-Shaara's work in rebuilding the country, emphasized that Israel needs to keep a, quote, strong and true dialogue with Damascus, and signaled that Washington invested real political capital in Syria's post-Assad recovery. And by pointing back to al-Shaara's recent visit to the White House, Trump made it clear he sees a path for Syria's future, one that depends on cooler heads and fewer skirmishes along its border with Israel. That's why the timing of the president's posts mattered. Last week, an Israeli raid, which left 13 Syrians dead, wasn't just another border skirmish. It was the deadliest Israeli operation in Syria since Israel seized Syrian territory a year ago, and it sharpened the politics around the country's transition. Since former Syrian strongman Assad's overthrow last December, Israeli troops have held a 155-square-mile stretch of southern Syria that was once monitored by UN peacekeepers under the 1974 disengagement agreement. Israel argues the move was temporary and necessary, and a preemptive shield to keep terrorists from rushing into the vacuum left by Assad's fall. But the international community counters that Jerusalem is just capitalizing on the chaos, pointing to the status of the Golan Heights as evidence that temporary lines can turn permanent. Inside and around that zone, Israeli forces have continued military operations, from targeted raids on suspected terrorists to hundreds of airstrikes on Syrian military sites. Jerusalem has also pushed for a wider demilitarized belt reaching south of Damascus, and that's a demand that the new Syrian government says is a red line. Even so, both sides are feeling out what a calmer future could look like. Al-Shaara, the former al-Qaeda commander turned Syrian president, has been engaged in direct talks with Jerusalem on a potential security agreement. While the mistrust runs deep, Trump's message signals that the U.S. wants both sides to focus on stability, not escalation. Netanyahu insists that he's open to an agreement, but won't budge on Israel's security red lines, such as the demilitarized belt. He said Israel remains, quote, determined to defend our communities on our borders and block any attempt by terrorists to establish themselves along the border. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Wednesday, the 3rd of December. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And I hope that if you haven't already, that you'll take a couple of minutes to check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find that, of course, on YouTube, well, that makes sense, at President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, Mike Baker here with a word from our friends over at Brickhouse Nutrition. Now, do you ever wonder if doctors have Cyber Monday sales? I'm sure you wonder that all the time. Well, the answer is the doctors at Brickhouse Nutrition do. And this is your last chance to save 30% on everything. That's right, I said everything. It's the final hours of the biggest sale of the year on trusted doctor-formulated health products. They're all 30% off. For example, Lean, right? Lean, Lean, the weight loss breakthrough to help you lose meaningful weight without injections. And there's Creatone, right? Pure creatine, made just for women to help you look fit, leaner, and toned without extra dieting or exercise. Even Field of Greens, that's a great, I tell you, try this, right? Field of Greens, that's what I'm talking about. It's the superfruit and vegetable drink shown in a university study to slow aging and deliver results your doctor will notice. And again, that's 30% off. Every Brickhouse product, from better sleep to superior collagen, 30% off. Come on. This is your last chance to save during the Brickhouse Nutrition Cyber Monday sale. Visit BrickHouseSale.com and save 30%. Again, that's BrickHouseSale.com. BrickHouseSale.com.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.